Hey, how's it going? It's Grant with the Garden of Eater, and in this video, we're going to go over everything you need to know on how to keep and breed Caridina shrimp successfully. Now, in the last video for this series, we went over how to cycle the tank. We used Florinbacter 1 as our bacteria, Florin multi as a fertilizer to feed the bacteria during a fishless cycle. We used the Escuro Brightwell substrate to lower the pH. We use RO water. We use GH plus minerals from Brightwell, no KH. And then we have a sponge filter, and then a lid and a light. And we let that all run for 30 days. 2 weeks into it, we did a water change, adding all the same chemicals and additives. And at the 30-day mark, we were just way too busy with Aquashella and Memorial Day and everything going on. We didn't have time to do the video or add shrimp to the tank. However, during Aquashella, we had these shrimp entered in the contest. We got first place in the crystal category, and I didn't want to put them through further stress of adding them back into their original tank just to move them into this tank. So it was a long night. I just acclimated them in, had them do their thing. There's already babies in the tank, and I think one's still buried. I haven't quite checked that out yet, but we got more shrimp to add to the tank from their original colony, and there's one of the babies right there. They're super tiny. There it is, swimming around. Back to the video, however. We got those acclimated and into the tank, and I finally have enough time now to do the video. So we're gonna do a quick water change on the tank before we add more shrimp to the tank, and then we're gonna acclimate the new shrimp. All right, so we got the water change going now. I got my siphon attachment so none of the babies can get sucked up, and we're gonna do about 30 to 40% because it's been 2 weeks. We do 10% every week or 20 to 30% every other week. That's what we highly recommend, if not more, for first-time shrimpers. You want to try and keep that water as pristine as possible in order for those babies to have maximum survival growth rate. So now we're filling the tank back up, and I gotta stress how important it is not to disrupt the substrate when filling back up the tank or even when siphoning the water out. This could cause a bacterial infection, and you want to avoid that as much as possible. So as long as you fill it up slow, you should avoid that, no problem. And you want to make sure your water parameters match up as much as possible. Mine are pretty much on point, so I can have a nice little trickle flow back in. If your parameters are off at all, you're going to want a slow trickle, a few drops per second back into the tank. That way your shrimp will adjust to the difference in parameters and not get all stressed out. And do not be surprised if your shrimp are swimming around like this. A lot of the times the females will molt when doing a water change and send out hormones in the water, and this will cause the males to swim around frantically trying to find that female. We call this dancing, and this is quite common during water changes, and it's a good sign that you have a nice healthy tank going on. Now the water going into the tank is roughly 150 TDS and 5 to 6 GH and 0 KH. The 0 KH is very important. If you have 1 to 2 KH, your substrate is going to constantly be fighting against the KH to lower the pH, and the KH is going to be constantly fighting the soil to raise the pH back to neutral. Now, if you have 0 KH, your substrate is going to have 0 resistance and will give the maximum efficiency to buffer as low as possible. So the RO water needs to be 0 TDS, 0 GH, and 0 KH when starting out, and then you mix only GH minerals to achieve the proper GH and TDS to give your shrimp the right minerals that they need to grow and molt. and thus have babies. Now the substrate is probably the most important part to the entire setup. It is a volcanic ash that is rolled up into little substrate balls. This is what's going to lower the pH in the water. These shrimp come from natural waterways with very low pH, and the babies need that low pH in order to survive, grow, and molt. And to achieve that, the most efficient way is this substrate, the shrimp soil. And I think the best brand on the market right now for sure is definitely the Brightwell Volcanic. Escuro for the black, the Cafe is brown. It doesn't lower the pH quite as low. On average, it's about 6.2, where I get a solid 6 usually out of all my black bags. And with this, I achieve the low pH that I need, where the only other way to achieve this would be adding chemicals that are very, very sensitive on. If you add too much, you could kill the shrimp. You add too little, and the parameters jump very quickly. The only other way would add a bunch of peat moss, and that causes a ton of tannins in the water, and it's not very effective. In the long run, you constantly have to switch it out, and then that jumps your pH and lowers it. And I don't know anybody out there that uses the peat moss effectively, or any breeders out there that swear by it. The only other substitute for the aqua soil would be the Akadame, the bonsai soil that they use. Alright, so we've got our shrimp. We are acclimating from the tank rack that we are tearing down. This will clear out the entire tank except for one buried female, who I will let have her babies in that tank, pull her out, have the babies grow up for a couple weeks, and then I'll add them to this tank as well. But for now, we just got a little air line that we've tied in a knot to slow down the drip. You can tighten it up to slow it down even more. However, the parameters from this tank to the other tank are only off by 0.2 pH, so it's not that big of a deal. A couple drips per second is not going to affect these guys. I'm going to let this container fill all the way up, probably about 30-minute drip, and then I'll just add these guys to the tank. Alright, so it's been about 30 minutes now, and I'm going to add the shrimp into the tank. Now, if these were to travel for long periods of time and the ammonia were to build up in the bag, I would not recommend pouring the old water from the bag into the tank. I would try to remove as much of that as possible. But since the shrimp literally sat in the container for 5 minutes before I started acclimation, I'm not worried about transferring the old water over. So we are just going to plop them on in there. Now, I highly recommend having a lid for your tank. This is going to prevent any TDS creeping from happening. A lot of people will top the tanks off. However, if your RO water is an absolute 0, this is going to cause your TDS to creep up ever so slightly over time. And then also you're going to need a lid. If you notice in the morning, your shrimp will look really crappy before you turn the lights on, and then probably for 15 minutes or so until the lights have warmed up, and then they gain their color back. The more intense the light, the more intense the color of the shrimp tends to be. However, you can run into some algae issues. So just cheap LED lights work great and is good enough for them to display their nice thick shells. Just total darkness is not going to work for them to show any good colors. Now, a lot of people right away want to feed the shrimp when they get them. I highly recommend waiting 1 week before you feed. We let the tank cycle for a good 30 days before we added any shrimp. so that way a healthy amount of biofilm was able to grow over all the surface areas in the tank. For that reason, we also added some wood and moss, and anything else you add to the tank is going to add surface area as well, but we didn't want any issues with disrupting the substrate, so we avoided adding any stem plants with this tank. So when you are ready to feed your shrimp, I usually wait about a week, and then I start off very small, and then I monitor my shrimp for about an hour to make sure all the food is gone. If it's not gone, I'll suck it up with a little turkey baster, and then I'll wait 2 to 3 days before I feed again, and then I feed a different food. There's plenty of different brands out there, from Shrimp King, Dwarf Shrimp, to CSF, which is Crystal Shrimp Foods. Almost all the food will come in these little granule pellets. I usually break these pellets into 3 pieces to feed my tanks off at first, and then I switch up every feeding. And a nice variety. This ensures that the shrimp get all the proper nutrients that they need to successfully breed and continue to grow. For filtration, I recommend using sponge filters. They are so efficient and easy. I rarely ever have to maintain them or do anything to them. You could use a hang on the back or canister filter with a little attachment like what was on the siphon for the water changes. However, with electricity and so many tanks, it's more efficient for me to run an air pump that powers all of my sponge filters. I could also use under gravel filter, but those tend to get clogged, and I use a lot of plants and with roots in some of my other tanks. Not this one, but I just like to keep everything the same. And it's also a lot cheaper to use these sponge filters. Now, general range of parameters for total dissolved solids, or TDS, anywhere from 110 to 280 has been heard of for breeding many different types of Caridina shrimps. Generally, some calcios and tigers do better with the higher TDS, where the bees like the crystal shrimp and Taiwan bees might do better at 110. I generally keep all of my shrimp at 150. It's a nice medium and middle range that I think does well for most shrimp. And this gives me around 5 to 6 GH. And of course, you have to have 0 KH. And for temperatures, I recommend the 72. You could go up to 74 or higher. However, that's when you start to deal with bacterial infections. You could go all the way down into the 60s before I recommend throwing a heater into the tank. So unless you had like a basement way up north where your tanks were dropping into the 50s, I wouldn't even worry about a heater in the tank. Now with Caridina, there's 3 different groups that we have within this group of shrimp. We've got the tigers, bees, and hybrids, and the hybrids are just the bees and the tigers crossed together. With the tigers, they are more hardy. They could take Neocaridina or Caridina parameters, where the bees, they absolutely have to have these Caridina parameters with the aqua soil and 0 KH for the low pH. And the hybrids, the majority of them need to have the Caridina parameters as well. However, the more tiger genetically modified they are, the more hardier they can be to withstand a wider range of pH as well as GH and KH. So now we just let the shrimp do their thing. Every 2 weeks I'll do water changes. After a week or so I'll start feeding every other day. And besides that, I don't do anything else other than, culling and maintaining proper quality, pattern, and color. With a pure redline shrimp, I won't really have to worry about color. They'll only produce red and white crystal shrimp. So I just really have to worry about pattern here. I'll feed and then I'll remove anybody that is showing a little bit too much red. The more white is what I'm going for with this line. In another tank, I have it where I'm breeding the red and white bands for the 4 bands. So in that tank, I cull the more white ones. And then All you have to know is that the shrimp will be able to breed in about 3 to 4 months. A female will get a saddle. It's right behind the head, kind of looks like a saddle to a horse. These are unfertilized eggs. As soon as she can produce a saddle, a male will be able to fertilize them. When he fertilizes the eggs will drop down to the belly. This is when we call the shrimp buried. At that point, the eggs will take about 30 days to hatch, and at that point, you'll have 30 babies, and if your water parameters are on point, you'll have a very high success with survival rate and them growing up to juvenile age. Around 2 months is about the size that you're able to start selling shrimp. Sometimes it'll take a little bit longer, like 3 to 4 months with certain Caridina. However, it could take even less with like tangerine tigers, where I've had buried tangerine tigers that are only like a month old. So, and then a shrimp can live for up to 3 to 4 years in around 72 degree temperature. They can breed a little bit faster if you have a higher degree temperature, but they won't live quite as long. I had some black tiger orange eyes that were entered in almost every single competition up to this last one at Aquashello. They lived for 5 years with me, and they were absolute champs, won many awards, but I kept their water parameters on point. They were constantly kept in 70 degrees, or 72 degrees, sorry, all year round. And even during the winters where the temperatures are kept the same, they kind of slowed down on breeding, but springtime came back, they start breeding again, and they just live a lot better if you keep them at a nice stable 72 degree temperature. And I think that about wraps it up for this video. I can't think of anything else, neither can Shelby. If you can, drop it down in the comments below. I'd be happy to help you guys out. But that is my basic, everything you need to know on how to breed and keep Caridina shrimp successfully. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and hit that notification bell for future content.